So I'm attaching a couple of loops on the back of a piece right now. I'm working on towards a show that my wife and I are having at the Olney Gallery at Trinity Cathedral in downtown Phoenix for the month of January. And my wife, Tess Moscow-Scherer, is making a series of sculptural books. And I am making a series of ceramic portraits that are reliefs. And this is a new departure for me because I have primarily been a maker of pottery over the years, and this past year I've been focusing more on figurative sculpture. And I took a workshop in July in Shanghai, China, with an artist by the name of Luo Xiaoping. And Xiaoping has developed a technique for making reliefs from a slab of clay. And so, for instance, this piece of mine is a slab of clay that I push up from underneath with one hand to make parts expand outwards, and the other hand is developing the forms at the same time. And so it's a technique that Xiaoping learned in China from a place called Yixing, where they have been making teapots for 2,000 years using this process of making a slab of clay and then turning that into a teapot. And Xiaoping has adapted that process for making teapots into making reliefs and figurative sculpture. And so I am new to this process of working this way. It involves working with clay that is very firm. So you see this piece over here, this is an example, and the clay is very, very hard. I can barely press my finger into the clay to make an imprint, and I'm pushing pretty hard. It is not clay you could make a pot out of on the potter's wheel or shape into a pot just with your fingers like I'm used to doing. But what is done is using a mallet. This is a traditional tool for making, in Yixing, for making teapots, and using the mallet to create a slab of clay by pounding. And the pounding does two things. It makes the clay flatter, but it also packs the clay particles tightly together so that you can manipulate the slab without it splitting and cracking. And it also makes the clay much more flexible than it is right now. So this is how it goes. So this takes a couple of minutes. So now you can see the slab is very soft, very flexible. And now I can just begin by very lightly outlining the form. And then my hand underneath began stretching the clay up. So working the clay like this, it makes it, stretching it makes it thinner, makes it a little weaker, and so I need to put a little bit of support under it. That's what the Kleenex is for. That'll just stay under there till the clay dries a little bit to the point where it can stay up and I can work on it more. So these are done in stages. So this is just a very preliminary stage of developing this, okay? So I have one over here that I started a little earlier that, let's see, yeah, right here. Another chicken that has firmed up a good bit and don't need the Kleenex anymore. Oh boy. That's Gwen is the golden one, and Jules is the black and white one, and Charlie is the brown one. So I'm creating the illusion of depth in these forms. A relief is interesting as an art form because it walks the line between a two-dimensional image like this photograph, where our brain interprets this as a three-dimensional object even though it's very flat. And but by pushing the clay forward, stretching it, it begins to have more of a three-dimensional presence, and requires a certain perspective. Like looking at it from above, we can get an idea of the form that the real chicken has. But if we look at it from any other perspective, it's distorted, it's not complete. And so I like that about reliefs, that it walks that line between 2D and 3D. Did scrape myself. thick clay slip to attach pieces also, and add a little more dimension to a relief if I need to. So this process, for people who worked in clay before, it's breaking the rules that we were taught, that we want to work with the clay when it's very pliable, very soft, and when we're attaching one piece of clay to another, we want to score the surface, rough up the surface of the two pieces, and use slip to attach them. And this techniques in China break those rules. They don't follow those rules. And I've experienced that a number of times in my travels in China, of discovering that the ways that I was taught, the ways that I learned in school and have seen people use, you don't have to do it that way, that there are other ways of working in clay. Working with the clay this firm requires a different way of thinking about it, of approaching it. But it makes things possible that you couldn't do if the clay was very soft, and using soft enough to use a rolling pin or a slab roller to roll the clay out. The clay, like I was showing, is so hard that a rolling pin or a slab rolling machine couldn't roll it out. And the clay, when you roll clay out with a rolling pin or a slab roller, it stretches the connection between particles and you end up with a weaker piece of clay. Whereas this method of using the mallet and pounding it, you end up with a piece of clay that is much stronger. And when you go to tear it or to pull on it, it's easily done, but it's much stronger than a piece of clay that is rolled out. Here I'm using slip to fill in some marks that I don't want. And I can use slip for creating texture also, to suggest feathers, fur. I've got a portrait of my dog and used the slip extensively to create that texture. There we go. And this one, to create texture in the fur, I added quite a bit of slip all over, and then manipulated. And it's gotten to a point now where it is firm, and I can go in and I can carve and modify the surface even more. Clay is, another thing about clay is these different stages of dryness, of wetness and dryness, allow us to handle it differently. So when the clay is in a liquid state, we call it slip. We can brush it on, we can form it as we would any other liquid. And as it begins to dry, we can then modify the surface even more. We can refine the surface, and it's the same material, but being in a little drier state allows us to manipulate it differently. And as the clay continues to dry, we can do other things to it that you can't do when the clay is really, really soft. So when I'm finished modeling it, sculpting it, I put the loops on the back of it like I did this one earlier, and then I let them dry. And here is one that I made yesterday that is drying and is in a very fragile state right now. And it's almost completely dry. And so when it's dry, it will be put in the kiln and fired, heated up to 1900 degrees, and then it's a different material altogether. It's not clay anymore, it's ceramic. And once it's ceramic, then I can apply glaze and then put it back in the kiln and heat it up to 1900 degrees again, and that will harden the glaze, and then I can apply more color and layer color on top of color and fire it a third time and maybe a fourth time, so I can get more painterly effects with the glaze, or underglaze actually is what it is. The color that I use is called underglaze, and it gives us color without a gloss. So these are fired samples of the underglazes that I'm using, and as you can see, there's no gloss to them except for a little bit in a couple of them, but the majority of them are very flat, and so that lends itself better to figurative sculpture rather than a glossy finish. So these pieces over here on this table are examples of pieces that have been fired multiple times with colors applied and fired, and then more color, and in this layering process. And then they'll be mounted some of them on this perforated metal that I would like as a backdrop for the pieces, and so they can be hung on the wall. So that's about it. So I've got the show titled Shared Lives. It's a two-person show with my wife, Tess Moscow Scherer. We will be showing our work at the Olney Gallery at Trinity Cathedral the month of January in 2025. The show opens on the first Friday in January, January 3rd, from 6 to 9 p.m. And the gallery is located at the corner of Roosevelt and Central in downtown Phoenix, and we'll be there through the end of January.